Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
It wouldn't be the holiday season if there wasn't candy, right? Celebrate the holiday season with the Holiday Crush. They've sprinkled candy with a holiday theme and fun-packed challenges every week for 5 whole weeks, finishing on January 4th. The more challenges you complete, the better your chances of unwrapping delicious rewards. So, are you ready to crush the holidays? Play the Holiday Crush now. Download it from the App Store, Google Play, or Windows Store for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht.
Welcome to Gegenpressing, the German football podcast from the Football Grad Network. I am returning for the second time host, Hal Stewart. Delighted to be so as well. We are going to today focus on the DFL Supercup, a recap of Eintracht Frankfurt against Bayern Munich. For a team famous for its sausage, it was actually Bayern who produced the bangers. And we do want to know how the sausage is made. So let's dissect this performance. It's time to ask, who was your top dog and who was your currywurst? Lewandowski had wait for this one, eh? Lewandowski had an Eintracht mind, only thinking about goals. So let's get the thoughts of German football expert, journalist, and self-confessed scouser. Happy birthday, Chris Williams.
Thank you very much. It was yesterday, but it's very kind.
This is the sort of the beauty of the podcast, Chris. I mean, people can be listening to it at any time. So embrace the love that's coming from me, and alongside fellow journalist Manuel, Veth, editor and chief at Football Grad Network, and a self-confessed German human man. Welcome.
Yeah, hey, how's it going? And also, happy 24th birthday, Chris.
It's not far off times two, but it will be in 10 years. So yeah, it's got, 40. So my maths is terrible anyway. So yeah, I'm 8 years off that, Manu, but thanks.
Hey, Chris, I wanted to say congratulations. You obviously were covering Liverpool, and I mentioned you are a Scouse person, so you were obviously happy that Liverpool gave you a victory on your birthday. I personally hate it when my team's playing on my birthday.
So I had a nice day working on my birthday, saw my family for an hour or so, and then drove down to Buckinghamshire. So I was really popular at home.
I was wondering, Sadio Mane, do the Liverpool fans sing, and if they don't, they should, this money, 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 money.
No, they don't. They sing Sadio Mane.
Right.
Mane. Oh, money, money. But they just sing that bit. They don't sing the horrendous after bit. That's some comedic.
Well, I prefer where I took that. Okay, I said it was going to be a Super Cup recap. I've already watched the game twice, just try and get my head round what went wrong for Eintracht Frankfurt. If you don't know, they fell to Bayern Munich by 5 goals to 0. Bayern were once again their dominant selves. Manu, did we see this coming?
Yeah, we didn't see that coming. And to a certain extent, when you watch the first, 20 minutes, right? You didn't really think it would go down that route either, because I actually thought that Frankfurt started quite well into that game. That's also what I wrote in my match report. And it was Bayern's first chance of the game that really produced the goods. And I mean, what a cross it was by Kimmich, from the half field. I wrote down it was about a 35 yard cross that found Lewandowski in the box. And that was their first real chance of the match and made it 1-0. And I think that's just maybe was the difference at that moment. And I thought what was disappointing after that is how Frankfurt completely lost their shape. I thought that they played very well up to that point, and I actually reckoned that this would be a very close game up at that point, but then they completely fell apart. And I think when you look at the way they played, it was the sort of this half breed between Niko Kovac's 3-5-2 and Adi Hütter, whatever he wants to do with the squad over the year, because in previous teams that he coached, he never actually played with 3 in the back. He usually played with 4 in the back. So I guess, for Frankfurt, there is a lot of work to be done, but Bayern were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, they really were. There was at 2-0. You mentioned how Bayern were clinical. Yeah. The stat was that Eintracht Frankfurt had 4 shots on goal, 0 on target. Bayern had 2 shots on goal, both on target. Lewandowski had scored both. It really was, Manu, the Robert Lewandowski show.
Yeah, it really was. And I mean, this comes off the back of a World Cup where he was very poor. This comes off a summer full of transfer speculations, and all these transfer speculations were made by him, right? He was quite open about saying, well, he wants to leave Bayern, and I have quite a good lot of connections to Poland and connections to very well-connected journalists there, and they all said, well, he really wants to leave, not because he doesn't like to be in Munich anymore, or he doesn't think that this isn't a good club, but because he wants to he very much has a career path laid out for himself, and he just wants to make another experience. And maybe he should have thought about that before he signed that long-term contract, right? That will keep him at the club until 2021. So Bayern basically said, no, why would we sell? We're not a seller's club. So there was a lot of speculation on how he would react to all of that. And then he does this at his first game back, and I think that's as good of a reaction than you will get from any player.
Absolutely. It's the perfect way to answer your critics. Chris, Eintracht Frankfurt, I mean, it was a horror show, particularly from their goalkeeper, really a game to forget.
Well, yeah, it wasn't the best of debuts for him, was it? Competitive debuts. I didn't think he did too bad on the whole. I thought maybe the third goal was probably the worst one of the lot for him. But I think I would personally put this down to the formation that was played. I mean, Adi Hütter, he's gone with a 3-4-2-1. And if we look back last season, they played that against Bayern. Kovac did. They were beaten 1-0. Then they rolled it out again a couple of other times against Bayer Leverkusen, where they were smashed 4-1. And in the league, the only time it was profitable was the second to last game against Hamburg, who were awful last season, and they won 3-0. They did it again the last game of the season against Schalke, and they were beaten 1-0 again. They had a few successes in the cup with it, most notably the semi-final against Schalke. But even then, that was a bit of a smash and grab late. They outplayed. Manu and I were in the Olympiastadion for the Pokal final, and they outplayed Bayern, but they did it 4-3-3, and it was a very offensive 4-3-3. So I don't understand why they went with this back three. Okay, you've got the 4 in the middle, but the back three couldn't cope with the fullbacks. The fullbacks for Bayern, Albert and Kimmich, just ran the game for them, and I think it was a real massive oversight to go with 3 at the back.
And this goalkeeper, for those that don't know, Manu, just tell us a little bit about him, because he's Danish. He did go to the World Cup. He's actually 26, but there will be those that know nothing about him.
Yeah, Frederik Røno. It's an interesting story. He was the guy that came in to replace Radetzky at the 2 previous clubs. So he seems to be always following Radetzky. He's a good keeper, but I think... And this really showed yesterday. He was injured. This was his first game. He missed a bunch of games in preseason. So this was his first preseason game, if we say that is preseason, right? So you could tell that he was rusty. This timing was off. I think that he didn't communicate very well with the back 3. And then of course, Chris is quite right. He was left alone, quite a bit. I mean, when you look at that first goal, they had a graph up where you quite clearly see the back 3. And when Bayern switch flanks, Kimmich is given a lot of space on the right, and then he's able to make that cross. On that cross, though, I don't think Røno looks very well either. But that's timing, right? And timing is something that keepers can only get through playing time. So I guess Hütter decided, well, this is a Super Cup game. There is money on the line, right? But at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if they lose that game. Of course, you don't want to lose 5-0 either, because that's not exactly going to give you keeper confidence. But I guess he had to play him now, because next weekend is already the cup. We're going to talk about that later, right? And then after that is already the Bundesliga. So there isn't very many games left for giving him the minutes that he needs to be consistent.
Yeah, I actually thought the second goal he was not best placed. Let's put it that way. If anyone gets a chance to see that, and you mentioned as well replacing Radetzky, who's left the club to go to Bayer Leverkusen, the Slovak keeper who was really regularly consistent. Eintracht Frankfurt will need to find consistency. They are going through a bit of a rebuild. I suppose the really good news was that Rebic, the Croatian star who played so well at the World Cup, would have drawn quite a lot of attention from a number of big clubs, but actually one of the best signings, despite all these new players that Eintracht Frankfurt have brought in, has been extending the contract of Ante Rebic. So if we're trying to take anything positive at the moment for any Eintracht Frankfurt fans listening, I suppose it is you still have your star man.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Chris, how many times have we said clubs have to keep their biggest stars in order to be successful, right?
Keys, yeah, you need to. If it's no good developing for other players, and other clubs, it's no good being a sausage factory if we're going to stay on the sausage theme.
Stay on it.
It's no good being a sausage factory for other clubs. And the fact that Rebic has stayed is a big sign for Eintracht. I think it'll stand them in good stead. I was lucky enough to see him a couple of times last season. I thought he was excellent. It obviously saw him week in, week out, but seemed live in the flesh in the stadium, and I thought he was brilliant. So to keep hold of that player, that lets others stay as well. If you start losing your best players, then you get viewed as a stepping stone, and Eintracht Frankfurt definitely don't want to be seen as a stepping stone. They want to be, going and doing bits in the Europa League and then maybe potentially one day qualifying for the Champions League. So I think it was very, very important that after losing their coach, that they didn't lose all their key players.
Yeah, and technically he was a Fiorentina player and was only on loan, but it's been made permanent and was going to be that way. Let's talk about some of the players that Eintracht Frankfurt have actually lost. Before we look at some of the players they've brought in, some big names, some up-and-coming stars amongst this lot as well. Marius Wolf has gone to Borussia Dortmund. You can talk about these in just a moment if you wish. There's also Mascarell, who's gone to Schalke. We mentioned Radetzky, the goalkeeper, has gone to Bayer Leverkusen. And well-known Kevin Prince Boateng, who's gone to Italy to play for Sassuolo. So some big names have left the side. It is in rebuild. But they've also brought in some names that are quite exciting, but there will be one or two players and fans that don't know about these players. So, Manu, just talk to us about where Eintracht Frankfurt currently are.
Well, I think that gets us back to this game that we just saw, right? And they are, and Chris is quite right, the 4-3-3 is how they won the cup. And I was surprised that they basically went to this 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1, depending on how you view it, formation, because that's not how Adi Hütter plays football or has played football with the clubs that he was with before. And that was, of course, RB Salzburg, who we know their philosophy is very much the same as RB Leipzig. So this is a side that plays 4-2-2-2, very high pressing football, right? At times a 4-3-3. And then he was at Young Boys in Switzerland, in Bern. And he very much played a 4-3-3 there too, a 4-2-2-2. And that's, again, a very different formation than what we said yesterday. So I guess for me, it was a big surprise that he rolled out with that formation against Bayern, because it was not very Adi Hütter-like. Maybe he thought he could give his team a little bit of confidence or ease him over to this new formation that he has in mind. And you didn't see very many new signings, and you didn't see Ante Rebic either, because of course he played at the World Cup all the way to the final. So I think of the new players that we saw, we only saw Toro, and didn't have the best off games. And I thought that, there was definitely still quite a bit of work to be done in terms of how they're going to set the formation. Of course, we saw Bruno, and he didn't have the best of games either, just to correct myself. Right. So those were the only two new signings in the squad. And I reckon there's 2 weeks left, right, till the Bundesliga starts. Have to double check who they're playing in the Pokal, but usually the first round for Bundesliga sides is quite straightforward. So I think really what you're going to see at the moment is a lot of work and getting in the players that they signed to work in this new system. And I reckon that the system that we're going to see on match day 1 of the Bundesliga is going to be very different than what we saw Kovac's play, because this is one thing that really struck me during this DFL Supercup final. And I'm curious what you think, Chris, is although Kovac didn't win the cup final with this formation, this was still very much a Kovac team playing against Bayern.
Yeah, it was. And I think that's why it was so shocking to see them play the way they did. And I get they pretty much fell apart after the 4th goal went in. And I think if Sandro Wagner scores from, 2.5 yards, maybe the score's even worse. I think 6-0 probably would have been a bit more reflective of the game, especially of the second half. But yeah, I don't know why you would come in as a new manager and try and change the philosophy or the playing style of a club when it's pretty much aligned to the one that you're going to bring in anyway, and especially in this game. I don't think it did anybody any favours, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them play a completely different game in the midweek. And obviously they're playing Ulm, Manu, so they should power past them with a youth side, even if they had to. Yeah,
that gives them no disrespect to Ulm. And yes, we can, again, we'll talk about the cup in a bit more detail, but that will give them another test match, give the keeper maybe some playing time as well again, and also to integrate maybe some of those new signings. And I reckon that there will be a transition away from this 3-5-2 or 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1, towards a 4-4-3-3 or 4-2-2-2, similar to what Leipzig play. But I guess he will need the time to integrate all these new players. And as you mentioned, Hal, there's quite a lot of new signings in the squad, and some of them are quite promising.
Yeah, some of them are pretty young. They'll be players that many won't be familiar with. Evan Ndicka from French football. He's a defender. He's only 18. When you look at the ages I'm about to go through, you think, well, how can these young players get used to a system that they won't have played in before super quickly after a Super Cup, super hammering? You've got Lucas Toro, 24, Pacienza, 24, Francisco Heraldez is 23, and Chris, Allen, because he's 21 and on loan from Liverpool, although I haven't seen too much of him in a red shirt.
We all know Allen is a Hertha Berlin last year and didn't do particularly well at times, did he, Manu?
Yeah, that was 2 years ago, actually. He was in Cyprus, I think, last year.
He went to was it Nicosia? But he was pretty poor. I think one of the German press described him as pretty much absent in all games he played in, which is a little unfair because I think he's trying to settle. I don't know if he'll ever come to Liverpool because I don't think he's going to get a work permit. Now, whether he gets time at Eintracht Frankfurt is probably for a topic for a different pod.
Well, he's got to stay in the same country if he wants to get a work permit, surely.
Well, yeah, you would think that. And he didn't even play regularly when he was over in Cyprus. So obviously Liverpool are keen to keep him. Otherwise, they would have moved him on. But I think this season's definitely make or break for him. But if Frankfurt change the way they play and do nothing like we saw the other night, he could do a job, maybe for the last 20 minutes or so, and maybe in the Pokal if he gets the opportunity. But he had his attitude and his approach to training was questioned a number of times, especially when he was at Hertha Berlin a couple of seasons ago. And even though he was playing over in Cyprus, he didn't play a majority of the games, which is slightly concerning because if you can't play in Cyprus, no disrespect to the Cypriot League, you're probably not going to be able to cut it in the Premier League or the Bundesliga.
Yeah, you just mentioned Hertha as well. So one man that made his name at Hertha amongst other clubs, mainly Stuttgart, let's be honest, Fredi Bobic. He is now no longer a professional footballer because he's almost as old as Chris Williams, but he's working for Eintracht Frankfurt, and he's been talking about the investment for the future. That seems to be something that he recognises as being as almost as key as keeping Rebic. So, Manu, these signings, should Eintracht Frankfurt fans be excited going for youth? Ooh, that's always good. Or really very much concerned with players like Allen that Chris has just mentioned not quite able to cut the mustard in the Premier League?
No, look, I think, and Bobic says this in the interview that he gave to Kicker, and it's a really interesting interview. And so if you do speak German, you have access to the magazine. I highly recommend it. But I think that the one thing that he points out, and he's quite right, when he first signed for Frankfurt as the sporting director, they had 2.7 million euros to make 12 signings. That was their budget, right? And that has changed significantly over the last 2 seasons. I mean, him and Kovac have done a big job getting this team turned around. And I mean, they're going to play Europa League. They won the cup. This was their first trophy in 30 years. This is something that we have to remember too. And they did this in 2 years. And this year they were able to spend money. And, they spent 20 million euros. So they basically were able to tenfold the amount of money they were able to spend for new signings. So I think while they are still a work in progress, any club that has been significantly underperforming for as long as Frankfurt have will need more than 2 or 3 seasons to get back to play with the big boys. But they have now consistently finished in the top 10 in the Bundesliga, which is more difficult than people think. And on top of that, they have brought home a trophy. They're now going to play in Europe, and they're going to take that European campaign very, very serious because they want to become a big club. And the only way to become a big club is to play internationally, because that's how you get recognized outside of Germany, right? And that's the only way these days you're going to become a big club. And that will then allow them to make even more investments. And I think that they're really on the right track with the investments they make. They will always going to lose players. But on the other hand, yes, they lost Mascarell. Okay, that's too bad. But they never really thought that they could hang on to him anyways, because he had that buyback from Real Madrid, right? So he was more or less a lone player. Yes, they lost Boateng, and Boateng was a big figure for them last year. But at the same time, Boateng is also getting older, and he really wanted to go back to Italy where his family is. When you look at who they kept though, they kept Jovic, they kept Rebic, they kept Gacinovic. Those 3 players were key when it came for them to win the DFB Pokal finale, right? Gacinovic scored the 3rd goal, Rebic scored the first 2. We all expected those 2 would be gone in the summer, that there would be no way for Frankfurt to hold on to those, what, you say crown jewels, and that's what they are for the club. And they did. And I think that's a huge step for them to basically say, okay, look, we can hang on to players now, and we can actually sign players and for bigger transfer fees, which then will allow us in 1 year from now, if you maybe finish in 8, instead of 8, we're going to finish 7th or 6th or 5th maybe. That will allow us to again invest in players, right? So I think that they're really quite smart, and Bobic is really quite smart in how he's doing it. And I think a lot of people in Frankfurt recognize it. I mean, Chris, when we were in Berlin, the Frankfurt fans, they seem to be, I remember when I was a kid, Frankfurt was always the diva of German football, right? It was a club that always underperformed. And right now there is very much a feeling about it that this is a club in going up, even with the defeat in the Supercup.
Oh yeah, we were chatting to Eintracht fans outside the stadium, and the vast majority of them were just happy to be in the capital for the day. And quite a lot we spoke to thought, they were going to get beaten. In fact, we were in the El Freunde party the night before, weren't we, Manuel? We were sat with a gang of lads, very well connected supporters at Frankfurt, and I said that I had them down to win 2-1, and they thought I was crazy. They thought they were going to get hammered. So the fact that they've managed to turn that around and maybe turn people's opinions in their own city, in their own club around, I don't think this battering is going to put too much of a downer on that per se, because it's a one-off game against Bayern, and there's a lot of things that happened, and it was a very bad day. And sometimes if you have a bad day at the office, you get spanked 5-0, and that's just what happened to them. So going forward, I think if they can sort out their playing style, then maybe they can be just as buoyant about their team as they were, in that night in Berlin.
It's exciting. I mean, the way you speak about it makes me feel not such a Debbie Downer after that 5-0 defeat. I know they've got Europe to look forward to. I hope they don't do a Cologne with European aspirations and extra stuff to concentrate on as well as the league. Manu, you mentioned that they want to grow. The fact that they're going to continue to tour the United States until 2026, I think is a wonderful thing and a tremendous positive that the club is using to try and increase its fan base. That's something that obviously you must be looking forward to continuing going forward, because you'll get a chance, based where you are, to actually see more of them in the flesh.
Yeah, I mean, I do go back to Europe very, very regularly, but you're quite right. And I think it is exciting for them to come over here. And one of the things I've learned since we've done this Gegenpressing podcast, and we're going into our second full season. We're going into 3 years in November, right? Doing this. And what I've learned is that there is a huge Eintracht Frankfurt community over here, which is really surprising, because you don't really have them on the radar as being one of the big clubs. But that's because in the 80s and the early 90s they were. And there's a lot of people that have moved over to the States or Canada that remember that time quite well.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. So they have quite a large following. And I mean, we get the feedback that we get, Chris, right? When we do articles on Eintracht Frankfurt is always big. They are in many ways a sleeping giant. There's a few sleeping giants in Germany. I mean, we have mentioned Stuttgart as well as one of the sleeping giants, and Eintracht, that's certainly one of the really big sleeping giants, simply because of also where they are as a club. Because if you are American and you fly to Germany, the first city that you will likely get in contact with is Frankfurt because of the size of its airport, right? So a lot of people just know where that is as a city and have spent time there. And I think because of that, there's a huge identifier for them. And some of the groups that we know is this big Eintracht Frankfurt fan club that's based out of San Francisco, for example. So it is very smart of them to keep coming back here, because I think if you want to grow as an internationally as a club from Germany, you're not going to necessarily do it in the traditional markets. You have to come over here. You have to come to the United States. China to a certain extent, but I guess Dortmund and Bayern have very much carved that up. So you have to be over here. And I think they do quite a good job with the training camps, the way they set it up, that they do training camps over stateside, and they're not only playing against the big clubs like Bayern and Dortmund do in the International Champions Cup, but they also play against MLS teams. They play against some of the USL teams, and that really gets small groups of fans hooked to them, right? In a way that the big clubs don't do because they don't need to. And I think that's a really interesting concept. And Freddie Bobic is quite smart. He said, well, we're going to keep doing these US tours until 2026, of course, when the World Cup is over here, because as the World Cup comes closer and closer, the football fever will grow. And that's really when you get the young people that are looking for clubs outside of MLS hooked on your clubs. And if you're doing this in smaller communities in the United States, you might as well do it this way.
Yeah, and it makes sense for fans in the US to follow German teams rather than Premier League teams, because a lot more Americans end up actually going to play in the Bundesliga, and now we can add Canadians to that as well. Also, you mentioned sleeping giants. I'll throw in a comatose giant of Kaiserslautern, but hey, one day. Let's move on to Sebastian Rudy, to RB Leipzig. This is a possible replacement for Kehrer.
Yeah, and it would make a lot of sense for Leipzig. Ralf Rangnick was out in the press last week. He wasn't particularly happy with some members of his team, and he also wasn't happy with the income into the club, which is quite strange, as that's one of the areas that he's in charge of as well as coaching. So I think Leipzig are very, very aware that no matter what they do, there's going to be a Naby Keita-sized hole, and they've had a whole season really to get someone in, and they haven't so far. They've brought in a couple. They brought in Konrad Lama, who hasn't settled particularly well. Obviously, Campbell came in, who can do a job, but he's hot one week, cold the next, and they really need someone to come in and fit that position quickly. Now, Sebastian Rudy could come in and do that. Apparently, he's been and visited Kotterweg, which is Leipzig's training ground. And I think when that happens, when a player starts visiting a training ground, I think it's pretty much odds on that they're going to follow there. And Leipzig really need someone to come in, because at the moment, they've sort of gone off the boil a bit with regards of recruiting Lookman. It was their number one target for this season. It doesn't look like they're going to get that. We've got some connections at Everton in a Football Grab network, and we were told that it's looking like he was going to be sold, and then all of a sudden Silva's come out and said that he wants to keep him, and maybe he's going to get until January. But then he wasn't played on the weekend in their opening Premier League fixture. So, have Leipzig been trying to do some business in the background to get him back over there? I think that's something that's going to run and may only be answered on deadline day in Germany. But as I say, for a Naby Keita replacement, Sebastian Rudy would go some way in doing that, and they need to plug that gap in midfield because that's a massive piece of quality that's disappeared. And anybody that saw Liverpool's game on the weekend will have seen Naby Keita play fantastically well. Well, anybody that watches German football will tell you he was only in second gear, so that gives you an idea of the quality that they've lost.
Yeah, Chris, it was Jamie Redknapp who said after 8 minutes watching Naby Keita that he looked like he'd been there for 8 years. Which
there we go.
That's slight exaggeration. But this is the same man who said that Didier Drogba was literally on fire. So we're going to talk about that was speculation, and it's possibly going to happen, going from Bayern Munich to Leipzig. But one thing that's happened is Schalke defender.
Actually, let me add my little bit on Sebastian Rudy, because there is an important bit that I need to add to this story before we move on, because I think what this Rudy deal potentially does, and one of the things that has limited RB Leipzig's growth is not lack of money, but financial fair play, right? And financial fair play, of course, is maybe the biggest issue that RB Leipzig have, because they're only allowed to grow in a certain way. But this deal, Sebastian Rudy, they could possibly get maybe even on almost a free transfer, which then means they could fill that midfield hole and then use the money, because right now the problem with Lookman, right, Chris, is that Everton asked for a lot of money, but they need to sign.
Yeah, they want 35 million euros by going by the reports in the UK.
So they need to sign a striker, and they want Lookman, but they also need to sign a central midfielder, and I can see that being really the thing that holds them back. So if they get Rudy on this deal, relatively cheap, and Rudy apparently is willing to forfeit a large part of his Bayern salary as well, that could really open them the door for them to make another Lookman bid. This is maybe another piece of information I think that is quite important when you look at this Rudy transfer, and why they're also maybe looking at bringing in a 28-year-old, which is, 28 is 4 years older than what Rangnick likes to sign when it comes to new players.
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. I think it makes perfect sense, and thank you, Manu, for adding that extra detail. Thilo Kehrer from Schalke to Paris Saint-Germain. It looks like it's in pounds anyway, 33 million pounds, and quite a surprising deal. Anyone who's seen him will know that he doesn't always start for Schalke, and not exactly a standout player, but seriously massive potential, and certainly in a position that they need to strengthen PSG, but probably means no Boateng to PSG. So, Manu, did this one catch you off guard?
Yeah, I think it caught everyone off guard. This is the kind of deal where, the day before there was a rumor that Schalke were going to sign Draxler, and I guess that rumor came because PSG's entourage was met saw in Gelsenkirchen. So I guess they were negotiating, but they were negotiating for quite something different. And yeah, I think there has been rumors about Thilo Kehrer possibly going and join Barcelona, and apparently they were bidding for him as well. But then at the same time, Kehrer was very close to signing a new contract at Schalke, and apparently the deal was structured in a way that if PSG hadn't met Schalke's demands, I'm hearing 37 million euros, then Kehrer would have signed a new contract in Gelsenkirchen. So it's an interesting transfer. I'm sort of on the fence when it comes to that one, because I'm really curious to hear what Chris thinks. But Thilo Kehrer is a massive talent. He can play centre back, he can play on the wings, but he's not the sort of player that where I went, oh wow, he was one of the players of the season last season. He's not the kind of player where I'm thinking this is going to be a massive loss for Schalke. He's just, I know the potential that he has, but I'm thinking if Schalke are getting that kind of money for him, this could really help them to do something in the transfer window, because I think Schalke are one of those clubs that really do need to do something, because if they are going to play the way they played last season with the system and the players that they have, they're going to be in massive trouble this year, because it's not going to work. So maybe something good will come out of this. But yeah, when it comes to Kehrer, I'm really curious what your opinion is on him, Chris, because he's never really been the kind of player where I was awestruck last year.
No, he's not. And he's certainly not a player that I would have thought would have gone for that sort of money, especially going to France. If he would have come to England, obviously German sides like to put a Premier League levy onto any transfer fee. So you could quite imagine him getting up to that level if he was coming to England. But yeah, he's never been a standout player. I can only think that Thomas Tuchel has seen something in him that he thinks he can really work with. And we all know that Tuchel likes to develop young players and bring them on. And it's part of that success he had whilst he was at Dortmund, and ultimately what was missing from their play last year. So he's obviously seen something in him. Obviously we'll have known him well, quite a close connection, same area. We'll have seen him, a great many times over the season. So yeah, it is a strange one, especially for this type of money. Had he gone for maybe half, would have been a little unfair, but had he gone for around about 20 million euros, I would have thought, well, okay, yeah, I can see they've got potential in them. But 33, we're getting into maybe overpayment. But then again, the age is on his side, and if that goes in over a great number of years, then that'll be a pittance of a fee, really, if he lives up to his potential. But it's a bit of a gamble by PSG, and you're quite right. Schalke now have a lot of money that they can put back into the side, because Manu, I can't remember what it was. I think it was January when I went over to Schalke and saw them play Hertha Berlin, and yeah, they won, but they were pretty dreadful for that month or so. And factor in Champions League football as well, and in the pot that they're in, it could be a real bad. It could be a real bad late winter, and if they manage to get through into the Europa League, it could be a bit of a poor time for them up to around about February, March. And if they're having a bad time in the Bundesliga because it's reflective of the fact that they don't get enough rest and they're not doing particularly well in Europe, we could have a Leipzig scenario on our hands where they just drop straight out of Champions League football into Europa League football, and then all of a sudden are down to the last couple of matches where they're fighting for some sort of European place in the season after, which I don't think is what Schalke need. They've got themselves back into the Champions League after, one point looking like they were going to get relegated the season before, and they need to be back in that area, because don't forget, Dortmund are going to be out for massive revenge for this season, knocked off their NWR perch as the best team in the area, so they're going to be looking to get that back. So Schalke have got it all to play for, so this money should help them if they can get someone in. But where are we now? The time's rapidly running out with what's left in the window. Unless they can go and poach someone, it's going to be difficult for them.
Yeah, I think that Schalke are the club that has still, of the top of last season's top four, they're the ones that have the most work ahead of them. And I mean, when I look at the spendings, they spent 31 million so far this year. Now with this deal, they have earned 6.5 million euros. So they're at the minus 25 at the moment. 37 will put them at plus 12. Put in the Champions League money. That means I reckon there's still a lot of money to be spent, considering too that they got rid of Hövedes, who was a big earner, right? Maya was a big earner. Goretzka was a big earner. So, there should be a lot of money available at the moment. And Heidel is a very good sporting director. He's very good at getting deals over the line. And I think they need to do quite a bit, because I can see them easily drop out of the top four, because you will have Dortmund, you have Leverkusen, you have Bayern, right? They're all, in my opinion, in a better position. From the back, you will have Gladbach. That's another side that will be pushing. RB Leipzig, for example, that's another side that I think when Rangnick is done with them, they will be quite a lot better. And for me, Domenico Tedesco, Schalke is such a demanding club in terms of the football that the fans want to see. You can get away with one season where you play just for results, Yes, last year was all about result-based football. I can't see that crowd, and you've been in the Schalke arena, right? The Veltins arena, Chris, and that's a crowd that's very similar to, in many ways, to the kind of crowd that you get at Bayern. That a 1-0 victory isn't enough. You can sell that to the fans for maybe a season, but I think that sort of football that they were playing last year, they would probably get a little bit in trouble if they continue to play that. So Domenico Tedesco needs to develop his football, and in order to develop his football, they will have to bring in some players.
I'm exceptionally worried for Schalke because who they've brought in hasn't addressed who's gone out, which is Goretzka and Meyer, and they're two fantastic players who, okay, they went through peaks and troughs last season, but on their day, if playing well, they're the sort of players that can power Schalke to victory. Now, they don't have either of them this coming season, and really, I don't know if they've strengthened in the right area. Okay, they've brought in Mark Uth, who's a brilliant centre forward, but in that central midfield area for either attacking or defensive, and let's not forget that Tedesco had re-rolled Meyer into both. You could go as far as say they've potentially lost 3 players with Max Meyer performing 2 of them roles.
Yeah, I guess that maybe they're hoping that Weston McKennie, the young American, can make a step up, but at the same time, you're losing Goretzka, and who was very important for them. Max Meyer, of course, towards the end of the season, when the relationship really broke down between the club and the player, wasn't as important anymore. But for large parts of the season, he was, right? So yeah, I don't know. I think when I look at that club, I really need to see a bunch of players that they have in now and brought in to perform exceptionally well in order for Schalke to hold the level that they had last season. And I reckon the level that they had last season will not be good enough this upcoming year.
Wow, it's going to be exciting to see. I sort of fancied Schalke before I listened to everything you just said to get in the top 4. I think Tedesco knows what he's doing, and we're all forgetting Salif Sane. I mean, if you talk about quality defenders, I watched him play for Hannover 96 plenty of times.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, the way they're setting it up now is that they are probably going to go away from the 3-5-2 because they have now the 2 big guys. Thilo Kehrer was, of course, a player that worked very well in that 3-5-2 formation. So they must have said, okay, look, if we're moving away from that formation anyways, with Salif, Sane, and Naldo as the 2 large center backs, then maybe they will do something in order to make that transition and play, 4-3-3 or 4-4-2 or, any kind of 4 in the back formation, because they have so many forwards as well. They signed,
loads of
forwards. Yeah. I mean, Chris, they already had Burgstaller, Embolo, and they brought in Teuchert in the winter, right, from Nuremberg, and then now they have Mark Uth as well. That for me shows for me anyways that there is probably going to be a formation change in the store.
Yeah, I hope they've been practicing it over pre-season, and I hope they've been working on it, because if you look at last season, Schalke only played with a back 4 twice. And in fact, they went on a back 5 once of them. So 3 times out their entire, how well it was, it's 34 league games, and then 2, 4, 5 Pokal games, and out of them whole times you're looking at 30 occasions where they played with 3 at the back. So to flick it over in one summer and maybe lose 2 your best midfielders, I think they could be in for a real problem. And we've seen what happened the other year when they got off to a bad start. They didn't win for, was it the first 6 or 7 games? And in fact, it might have even been all the way to November. I think it was our 2nd or 3rd podcast when they finally won a game. So, it's going to be difficult for them.
Yeah, well, I'll just leave you with 3 words. Franco Di Santo. Right, let's move on to the Cup, because Manuel quite rightly said that the Pokal is something that we will preview, the DFB Pokal, which is the Cup. And the first round, always fun, the underdogs taking on the big boys. So, Manu, how do the amateur clubs actually qualify for the Pokal?
Yeah, so it's a little different than in England, because a lot of our listeners are used to the FA Cup, right? In the FA Cups, you have pre-rounds, if I'm not mistaken, Chris, right? You play,
you do. They have pre-qualifying rounds. So I think it starts round about July, doesn't it? The winners win it in May, and then it's back underway in July.
Oh yeah, it's already underway massively. Yeah, You're absolutely right.
So in Germany, there is what we call regional cups. So the regional cups, every land has their own cup. So there's a Bavaria Cup, etc., etc., etc. So the winners of those qualify. So the first round is 64 teams. There's 36 teams from the Bundesliga and second Bundesliga. They are straight in. The top 4 finishers of the third division are straight in. And then there's 21 remaining cup winners of the regional football association. They're called Verbandspokale, right? Then there is the 3 remaining slots that are given to the 3 regional association with the most men's teams. So Bavaria, 1860, for example, did not win the Bavarian Cup last year, but because they finished first of the Regionalliga Bayern, that made them technically Bavarian champion, and that qualified them for the first round of the cup. So that's where the remaining 21 teams come from. So there's the third division teams, to a large extent also play in the regional cup competitions, which makes it very important, because the regional cup competitions then qualify you for potentially for DFB Pokal the following year. So it's kind of similar, I guess, only that you, in a sense, have Germany as a federal state, right, as a country of many countries. There is a sort of, kind of like it is for the Champions League and the Europa League, that you have to qualify for the national competition, which makes the regional cup competitions really interesting, and also makes it possible for sometimes 5th or even 6th division teams to qualify for the DFB Pokal.
Wow, and Friday, August the 17th, is when we can watch some of that action. So, Manu, who are the amateur clubs that are taking on some of the big boys?
Yeah, I guess the one that everyone is going to look out for, and thankfully there was a great article in Kicker about them, because I had no idea who they were, and that's Dochters in Assel. I dare you to pronounce that, boys, because they're from Lower Saxony, so between Cuxhaven and Hamburg, and they won the lottery, because they're going to get to play Bayern in that first round. They are a 5th division team, Landesliga, I think it's called, and they are going to play in that big ticket game against Bayern. And I think what's really interesting is they had the option to move to Hamburg and play at the Millantor in St. Pauli, but they decided to host the game in Drochtesen to play there in their 7,500 seat capacity stadium, because they wanted a little bit of a home advantage. So yeah, this is going to be a fascinating one, and I love the cup. Chris, we were lucky enough to go to the cup final. You've been to the cup final now 2 or 3 times in a row, right? With Dortmund. Twice. Yeah. So it's just such an amazing event, and it's the cup in Germany is just, I have no idea how it compares to other countries. I know when I lived in England, it felt, the London is such a big city. So the cup final at Wembley almost seemed to get lost when I lived in London. Whereas when you're in Berlin, the two sets of fans really take over the city for the entire day. And it really encapsulates the entire cup feeling for me, and the way you get there. And I personally am a big fan of the cup. And I think, when you look at that first round and some of the pairings, I think you're in already for quite a treat from the very beginning, and we see quite often that a lot of the Bundesliga sides gets eliminated early on.
The romance of the cup. I will actually have a go at saying that name, because it sounds to me like someone would sort of say, go and see my medical professional, Dr. Sen Assel. He'll sort you right out.
Yeah, that's close enough, I guess.
So what are some of the other amateur sides we might not have heard of that are taking on some of the teams we will have heard of, Manu?
Yeah, so Dortmund, of course, they got Veth, so that's a 2nd division side. Everyone will know them, so we don't need to go into too much detail. But then when you look at, for example, Schalke, they got Schweinfurt. This is a side that I know quite well from last season, because 1860, of course, played in the Bayern Liga with them and lost the semi-final of the Bavarian Cup to Schweinfurt, and that's how Schweinfurt qualified for this, because they ended up winning the Bavarian Cup. They were really unfortunate last year, to be quite honest, because everyone tipped them to win the Bavarian League and get promoted to the third division, but then 1860, of course, dropped down into that division, and as a previous second division side, were of course favorites then to win it, and they did in quite convincing fashion. So they were a little unfortunate to be still stuck in that fourth division. They're going to play Schalke. Schweinfurt is a small Bavarian town. Not a lot of people will know about it. I mean, it's a funny name. Schweinfurt means pig crossing. So you can have fun with that, because fits with the sausage factory. Also fits also of course fits with the fact that the CEO of Schalke, the president of Schalke, owns a sausage factory. So I'll let you play with that one. So that's going to be an interesting one. Pforzheim against Bayern Leverkusen. Not a lot of people will have heard about Pforzheim. Pforzheim is from Baden-Württemberg. Another small club, one-day regional competition. Of course, Chris, I put this down because we spent some time in Berlin, and you did a video shoot about them. BFC Dynamo playing Köln. Remember, we went to their stadium, and we went, of course, to the stadium that they play in now as well. That's going to be a great day out if you're in Berlin, right?
Yeah, you're quite right. So Dynamo Berlin, where you and I spent, it was a good couple of days. We walked probably around half of Berlin doing the old football tour. So yeah, in the sports forum, Manuel, I'll let you pronounce the second part of that stadium.
Hohenschönhausen.
Thank you. Then we went from there, which was their very old ground where they played Liverpool in. We went to the Frederick Ludwig Jan Sports Park, where they played Nottingham Forest in. That's why I went over to see them, because they have such a tremendous history when they're the champions of the old GDR, the old East Germany. But yeah, it's going to be a big game for them against FC Köln, and everything I've seen so far has shown me that this game has been swapped to the Olympiastadion, which I think is a bad move for me personally.
Yeah, that's
one
of the things you want.
When Manu and I were there, they were redoing the ground, so their old ground was getting a makeover. There was two guys there, and when we were trying to film and do audio, and they were strumming grass, which didn't work for Manu and I at all, but it certainly worked for the club because the place was looking really nice. And they were getting the pitch ready. Now, we were unable to ascertain out of them whether that was for training or whether they were looking at making a move back to that stadium. But it was a real old traditional standing terraced football ground. Obviously, the new ground that they're playing now in Ludwig Jan Sport Park is fabulous. It's where the Berlin Cup final is played, and obviously that's why they're there, because they won. I think they won 2-0 on the day that I flew home. So yeah, I'll be really glad to see them back in. And yeah, they get a lot of bad press because they've been associated with right-wing elements in the past. Obviously, going back all the way back to when the war was there, they were the team in the Stasi. So they do get a bit of bad press. But I think it's, as you said, Hal, there's a bit of a romanticism of the cup there to take it. It's just a shame that they won't be playing with their old badge, which people should Google because it is as East German as it comes.
Yeah. It is now owned by a Hertha fan, which is why they can't use it, which is pretty hilarious. They lost the rights because they sold the rights to the badge. When they renamed the club to FC Berlin in the early 1990s, when they would try to get away from that image and didn't secure the rights, because the badge is very similar to the Dynamo Dresden badge, right? The very common D that you see with all the Dynamo clubs all over the post-Soviet space, and of course the Balkans as well. That common D on a background, that was Dynamo Berlin's badge as well, and they lost the rights to that to a Hertha fan, which is, I think, is hilarious.
It actually says on Wikipedia, which means it's true, that they have strong rivalries with Dynamo Dresden, Union Berlin, but have a friendly rivalry with the Scottish side, Aberdeen. I have absolutely no idea why that would be the case.
Neither do I.
Well, we'll throw that out there. If you know why, get in touch. That would be fascinating.
I know why, because they played them back in the day when they were a really decent side, and obviously they travelled around Europe playing loads of different teams, and Aberdeen were one of the sides that they played on one of the many occasions in their forays into Europe.
Well, there you go. That was quicker getting in touch than I anticipated, but absolutely correct. There you go. I love learning stuff, and that was something I didn't know. So that's a really great game to watch. As you mentioned, they'll be playing Cologne. I also mentioned Union Berlin. So both those sides, of course, are facing off in the opening game. Actually, not the opening game. What are we now in the Bundesliga 2? They've already played a couple of games, haven't they?
Yeah. Yeah, the Bundesliga 2 is 2 match days in.
Yeah, 2 match days, yeah.
And I'm happy to report that Hamburg won a game.
Oh, excellent. And also, Manu, I want you to keep me abreast of every time, because you mentioned Eintracht Frankfurt have such a large following in North America. Every time you see a Hannover 96 fan, I want you to take a picture of them and send it to me.
Okay, I'll note this down as homework.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking forward to the first round of games in the DFB Pokal. Guys, unless there's anything you want to leave us with, Manu?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the first round. It's exciting. So we're going to have a few previews coming up on fußballstadt.com. So if you want to know more, there's a few of the games that we've mentioned, of course, and I'll throw in some random ones that I think are going to be interesting to watch. For example, Kaiserslautern against Hoffenheim. Kaiserslautern, you're quite right. That's a sleeping giant that have fallen quite low this season and is struggling right now in the Liga 3 as well. They're playing Hoffenheim, and that's a regional rivalry. Used to be the other way around, of course, with Hoffenheim, the lower division team, and Kaiserslautern, the top division team. But that game will be in Kaiserslautern. I reckon that will be a great atmosphere and a really good game to watch as well. And I'm really curious to see what Hoffenheim are doing this year anyway. So I'm looking forward to that. Rostock against Stuttgart. I think this is going to be another one where the atmosphere is just going to be amazing. Chemie Leipzig, Jan Regensburg. I want to point that one out too, because I saw the Chemie fans, they were at 1860 over the winter. They were playing a charity match against each other. So this is a club with a really good fan base in Leipzig. And then, of course, East German derby, Carl Zeiss Jena, Union Berlin. Carl Zeiss Jena, a club that made the Cup Winners' Cup final in 1981 against Dynamo Tbilisi. Lost that game. And, of course, Chris, Union Berlin. Don't need to say much more about them, do I?
No, you don't.
Well, Chris, unless you've got a Stana stairlift to attend, is there anything else that you would like to bring to us?
No, just the massive amounts of ageism that have since I turned 40. No, I will be doing all the imagery surrounding that. There's Champions League games and there are Europa League games on. So, yeah, I've been doing some stuff for that for Manu. But no, pretty much I will just be plodding on as per usual.
Plodding, very much the term nowadays, Chris. If I were you, I'd play your favourite record first. That was Gegenpressing, the German football podcast from the Football Grad Network. I've been Hal Stewart. Thank you very much, Chris Williams and Manu Veth. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you chaps. Enjoy the start now of the Bundesliga.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen, dich abzuholen.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.